Very good morning, friends. So, I hope you're all safe and healthy. Well, I have been discussing with you the concept of ECL model, which is given under Index 109, and we created a three-step model based on ECL. The first step was, looking into what approach are we going to apply to which particular financial asset. So the first instance, I exposed you, which financial assets are going to be covered under the purview of Index 109. And then we identified, that which approach is going to be applied to which financial asset. Then came the step number two, where I gave you a feel in the last video, discussing the inputs regarding how the ECL is measured, where we compare the contractual cash flows and the expected cash flows, and we get the difference and apply a time value of money. The main issue in terms of step number two is making an assessment of what you call changes in a credit risk. Mind the word, I've given a focus on changes in the credit risk. We are not talking in terms of assessment of a credit risk. Mind you, we're looking in terms of changes in a credit risk because there would be a certain credit risk. Remember, credit risk is the failure of the party to pay you money. So there would be a certain credit risk at the initial recognition, and we're looking at the changes in the credit risk on the balance sheet date. Let's have a look at this in detail.
सीए फाइनल आइकॉनिक बैच अनअकैडमी पे आने वाला है। जैसे सीए फाउंडेशन और इंटरमीडिएट के स्टूडेंट्स प्लस फीचर्स के अलावा कुछ एडिशन फीचर्स अवेल कर सकते हैं, बिल्कुल ऐसी सीए फाइनल के अंदर आपके पास ये आइकॉनिक बैचेस आने वाले हैं। और इन आइकॉनिक बैचेस के अंदर आपको प्लस फीचर्स के अलावा, जहाँ पर प्लस फीचर्स में आपकी लाइव इंटरेक्टिव क्लासेस होती हैं, इंडिया के टॉप एजुकेटर्स आपके साथ जुड़ते हैं, और इसके अलावा आपको आइकॉनिक बैचेस में एक तो डेडिकेटेड डाउट सॉल्विंग मिलेगी और सभी सब्जेक्ट्स की आपको प्रिंटेड बुक्स मिलेंगी, और साथ में टेस्ट सीरीज और डिस्कॉर्ड, यानी कि आप अपने पीयर ग्रुप के साथ कनेक्ट कर पाएंगे और इनकी कंप्लीट डिटेल इंफॉर्मेशन जल्द आपके पास आने वाली है। और साथ में एक और बढ़िया अच्छी खबर है, और वो अच्छी खबर ये है कि इस वक्त अनअकैडमी पर चल रही है बम्पर ऑफर। और बम्पर ऑफर के अंदर अगर आप मान लीजिए सीए फाइनल ग्रुप 1 या मान लीजिए ग्रुप 1 ग्रुप 2 दोनों के कॉम्बो ऑफर्स लेते हैं तो 6 मंथ्स की सब्सक्रिप्शन पर आपको 1 मंथ एक्स्ट्रा मिलेगा, 12 मंथ्स पर आपको 2 मंथ्स एक्स्ट्रा मिलेंगे, और 24 मंथ्स पर आपको 3 मंथ्स एक्स्ट्रा मिलेंगे। तो किस बात का इंतजार है, आइए लेट्स क्रैक इट।
Now, as I said, the focus in terms of step number two is looking at the assessment of the changes in the credit risk. Now, why are we making that assessment? The first question what comes to the mind is, one thing is that how would you make an assessment? That's one thing. But we are talking first of all, why do you need to make a assessment of the changes in the credit risk? Well, if you remember, there are two approaches mainly which are used for the ECL approach, and one is called a simplified approach and the other is called a journal approach. Now, as far as a simplified approach is concerned, we don't need any assessment of changes in a credit risk. Mind you, we do need an assessment of the credit risk, but we don't need an assessment of the changes in a credit risk. What is the reason that we don't need to track the changes in the credit risk is because within the simplified approach, as well as you can say, overall, if you look at the ECL approach, you can say that there are two kind of approaches within the journal approach. One is called a 12 months ECL and one is called a lifetime ECL. Now, what do you mean by a 12 months ECL or a lifetime ECL? So let's say, for example, when you're applying a simplified approach, we would see, sitting at the initial recognition that what is the expected credit loss which will take place over the life of the instrument. And the other one is that in a journal approach, there are two kinds of approaches. One is that you need to see that, what is the change in the credit risk. If it is massive, then you start looking into, a lifetime ECL approach. You start looking at the credit risk over the lifetime of the instrument. But if the credit risk changes are not very significant, then you start looking into the expected credit loss only over a period of 12 months. Now, since a general approach, we need to make a selection whether we apply a 12 months ECL or we apply a lifetime ECL. We need to make a assessment of the changes in the credit risk. Because if the changes in the credit risk is significant, then we need to apply what you call a lifetime ECL. But in that particular case, if the changes are not significant, then we apply a 12 months. But as far as a simplified approach is concerned, it is always based on a lifetime ECL. So we don't need to make any assessment of the changes in terms of the credit risk. Now, how do you make an assessment of these changes in the credit risk is something which we're going to talk again in the next video with you. So that's all for the day. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.